3 months had passed since the confrontation with the compact officers, and Vareth 7 had transformed in ways that Tayson could never have imagined. The Galactic investigation had confirmed everything the survivors had claimed, uncovering decades of falsified records and buried evidence that proved the relocation had been a deliberate attempt to eliminate an inconvenient population. Reparations had been ordered. Supplies had begun arriving, and the Vareth were officially recognized as the rightful inhabitants of their homeworld. Once Agan Tayson stood outside the small medical clinic he had built near the cave system and watched the supply shuttle descending through the afternoon sky. This was the third delivery this week, bringing food and medicine and equipment that would help the Vareth rebuild their society. The Council of Mothers had accepted his offer to stay and serve as their doctor, granting him permanent residency as a protected member of their community. He had come here seeking solitude and instead found himself more connected to others than he had ever been in his life. The clinic door opened behind him and a young Vareth emerged. One of the children who had been training as his assistant, Dr. Yoon. She said in careful Galactic common, "The patient with the lung infection is asking for you." "I will be there shortly," he replied. "Finish preparing the treatment room." She nodded and hurried back inside, her movements quick and eager. The Vareth young had adapted to his presence faster than the adults, seeing him not as a strange alien but simply as the healer who made sick people better. He had taught 3 of them basic medical procedures already, and they showed remarkable aptitude for the work. Movement on the restored grasslands caught his attention, and he turned to watch a hunting party returning from the Eastern Valley. Sereth led them, her gray-blue skin gleaming in the sunlight, and her stride confident and strong. 3 months of proper nutrition had transformed her from a starving survivor into the powerful huntress she had always been meant to bait. Hunting party carried fresh meat from the animals that had been reintroduced to the ecosystem, creatures compatible with Vareth dietary needs that now roamed the grasslands in growing numbers. Sereth spotted him watching and changed course to approach the clinic. "Successful hunt," she announced as she drew near. "The young ones performed well. They learned from the best," Tayson replied. "Flattery?" she said with what he had learned to recognize as a Vareth smile. "You are becoming more like us every day. Is that a good thing?" "It is the highest compliment I can offer." She fell into step beside him as he walked toward the clinic entrance, matching her longer stride to his shorter one with practiced ease. "A new ship arrived at the orbital station this morning," she said. "More human volunteers responding to your broadcasts." "How many?" 12, including 3 more medical professionals and 2 engineers. Tayson felt something warm spreading through his chest. His broadcasts during the standoff had done more than just alert Earth's diplomatic mission to the injustice being committed. They had inspired other humans to come and help. Volunteers who wanted to be part of rebuilding what the Compact had destroyed. "I will need to expand the clinic," he said. "The Council has already approved construction of a larger facility," Sereth replied. "We discussed it this morning while you were treating patients. You made decisions about my clinic without consulting me." "We made decisions about community resources," she corrected. "You are part of the community now, which means you do not get to make decisions alone." There was gentle teasing in her voice, and Tayson found himself smiling despite his mock indignation. In Vareth tradition, Sereth continued, "A male who provides for the community is considered family to everyone he serves. I remember you mentioning something about that. Then, you understand that by treating nearly every person in our settlement, you have technically been adopted by every family on the planet." "What exactly does that mean?" "It means you have 43 families watching out for your welfare," Sarah said. "And 43 families who will be very upset if you ever try to leave." Tayson thought about the lonely homestead, he had built when he first arrived. The silent shelter where he had planned to spend years in isolation, he had not visited it in weeks. "I am not planning to leave," he said quietly. "Good." They reached the clinic entrance, and Sarith paused at the door. "The Council of Mothers asked me to deliver a formal message," she said, her tone becoming more serious. "We wish to express our gratitude for everything you have done. Not just the healing, but the fighting and the standing between us and those who would harm us. I only did what anyone would do." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You did what humans would do, which is apparently quite different from what anyone else in this galaxy considers normal behavior." She reached out and placed her hand over his heart, a gesture he had learned carried deep significance among her people. "You came here seeking solitude," she said, "and instead you found us. And instead of running away, you stood and fought for people you had no obligation to protect. I could not simply ignore what was happening." "Most beings could," she replied. "Most beings do, every day, across the galaxy. Because it is easier to look away than to get involved." Her amber eyes held his gaze with intensity that made his breath catch. "But you did not look away," she continued. "And because of that, my people have a future again." "Your people saved themselves," Tayson said. "I just made some noise and attracted attention." "You gave us hope," Sarith corrected. "And hope is what kept us alive long enough to be saved." The supply shuttle had landed in the distance, and figures were beginning to emerge. Human volunteers ready to begin their work. Tayson watched them approach and felt something he had not experienced in many years. Purpose. He had spent 2 decades as a trauma surgeon, saving lives in an endless stream that had eventually worn down his spirit and left him hollow. He had fled to the edge of the galaxy seeking escape from responsibility. Instead, he had found a responsibility worth carrying. "I should go greet the new arrivals," he said. "I will come with you," Sarith replied. "The Council has designated me as liaison to human volunteers." "Is that a real position, or did you make it up?" "I made it up," she admitted. "But the Council approved it when I explained that someone needed to prevent well-meaning humans from accidentally offending our traditions." They walked together across the grasslands toward the landing site. The Varith Huntress and the human doctor, who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, one of the new arrivals, a young woman with medical insignia on her uniform, spotted them and hurried forward. "Dr. Yoon?" she asked eagerly. "I am honored to meet you. Your broadcast inspired me to volunteer." "Welcome to Varith 7, Tayson replied. "We have a great deal of work to do." "Why did you stay?" the young doctor asked. "You came here for solitude. Everyone knows the story. So why did you choose to remain when you could have walked away?" Tayson considered the question carefully. He thought about the exhaustion that had driven him to flee Earth, the endless parade of patients who needed more than he could give, the crushing weight of responsibility that had nearly broken him. Then he looked at Sarith standing beside him, at the healthy Huntresses returning from their hunt, at the Varith children playing in the grasslands where their ancestors had once roamed free. "I came here to be alone," he said finally, "and I discovered that I was just looking for the right people to not be alone with." The young doctor nodded as if this answer made perfect sense. Perhaps it did. Sarith made that sound that was almost a laugh. "Come," she said to the volunteers. "I will show you where you will be staying, and Dr. Yoon will begin your orientation after dinner." She caught Tayson's eye as she led the newcomers away, and there was warmth in her amber gaze that he had come to treasure. Over the past months, he watched her go, and then turned to look out over the transformed landscape of Varith 7, the planet that had been called barren and worthless was becoming alive again, restored by determination and hope and the stubborn refusal to accept injustice. He had come here seeking the end of his story. Instead, he had found a new beginning, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Yoon Tayson was exactly where he wanted to be. The compact patrol ship descended through the morning sky like a blade cutting through silk. Sleek and angular and painted in the official colors of Galactic Authority, Taysen watched it land on the plain near his homestead and felt his pulse quicken with each passing second. Two figures emerged from the vessel, tall and thin with pale yellow skin and multifaceted eyes that reflected the light like polished gems. Keth, the bureaucratic species that administered most compact enforcement operations, creatures known for their absolute dedication to rules and their complete indifference to circumstances. They wore the gray uniforms of enforcement officers and carried scanning equipment that they immediately began pointing at everything around them. Human. Designated Yoon Taysen, the first officer, announced as they approached. You are registered as the sole inhabitant of this world. Yet our sensors detect 44 biological signatures in this area. Your sensors are correct. Taysen replied calmly. Explain the discrepancy. There are survivors living here, he said. Members of the Verith species who were supposedly relocated 60 years ago. The two Keth exchanged glances, their compound eyes flickering with rapid communication. The Verith relocation was completed successfully according to official records, the second officer stated. No Verith remain on this world. Your official records are wrong, Taysen said. The relocation was a cover for attempted genocide, and 43 Verith survived by escaping from transport ships that tried to space them. That accusation is not supported by documentation. I have documentation, Taysen replied. Testimony from survivors, physical evidence of their presence here for 6 decades, and medical records showing injuries consistent with escape from spacecraft. The first officer's expression did not change, but something shifted in the way they held their scanning equipment, regardless of historical disputes. Your colonization license permits only a single registered inhabitant, they said. Unauthorized residents must be processed according to Compact Regulation 774, processed how? Relocated to appropriate facilities for identification and classification. Taysen felt cold anger building in his chest. You mean detained, he said. Taken from their homeworld again and locked away somewhere convenient. Regulation 774 does not specify detention conditions. These people have been through enough, Taysen said, his voice hardening. They will not be removed from their home again. You do not have authority to make that determination. Then I'm invoking my authority as a human citizen under compact treaty provisions. The Keth officers paused, their multifaceted eyes processing this unexpected development. Specify the provision you are invoking. Article 93 of the Human Integration Compact, Taysen said, recalling legal documents he had studied years ago during his medical training. The right of any human property holder to grant asylum to refugees on their own registered land. The Verith are not classified as refugees. They are survivors of genocide who have been living in hiding for 60 years. Taysen responded, if that does not qualify as refugee status, then the compact has no meaning. The first officer activated their communicator and began transmitting rapidly in the Keth language. Too fast for Taysen's translator to follow. He knew they were reporting to their superiors and requesting guidance on how to handle this unexpected situation. Movement on the ridge caught his attention, and he looked up to see Sareth standing there with a dozen Huntresses at her sides. They had emerged from the caves despite his request that they stay hidden, and their amber eyes watched the enforcement officers with predatory focus. The Keth noticed them as well and immediately drew their sidearms. Unauthorized personnel detected, the second officer announced. You will surrender immediately for processing. We will not, Sareth called down from the ridge, her voice carrying clearly across the plain. This is our world, our home, and we have spent 60 years waiting for someone to acknowledge what was done to us. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. Then act. Sereth replied, and her claws extended with a soft snick of sound. We have nothing left to lose. Tayson stepped between the officers and the ridge, placing himself directly in the line of fire. Stop, he said firmly. Nobody is going to shoot anyone today. Remove yourself from the enforcement zone, the first officer commanded. No, you are obstructing compact operations. I am protecting refugees on my own property. Tayson replied, that is my legal right, under the treaty my species signed when we joined your compact. He pulled out his communicator and began broadcasting on open channels, transmitting everything he had learned about the Vareth massacre, every piece of evidence he had collected, every word of testimony that Sereth and her people had provided. What are you doing? The second officer demanded, making sure this conversation is heard by more than just your superiors, Tayson answered. Human space is receiving this transmission right now, and humans have a strong reaction to stories about genocide and cover-ups. The officers, communicators began buzzing with incoming messages, priority signals that made their compound eyes flicker rapidly. Earth's diplomatic mission is requesting an emergency session, the first officer reported to their companion. They are demanding a full investigation into the Vareth relocation records. That investigation will take time to arrange. They are demanding it now. More signals arrived, more demands and inquiries, and the bureaucratic chaos that erupted. Whenever humans decided to make an issue out of something, the compact preferred to ignore. The second officer stepped toward Tayson with obvious anger in their posture. You have created a significant diplomatic incident. Good, Tayson replied. That was exactly my intention. A new transmission came through. This one, carrying the authentication codes of Compact High Command. The first officer listened for a long moment, then lowered their weapon. We are ordered to withdraw pending investigation, they announced. You will remain on this world under observation until the matter is resolved. We will remain on this world because it is our home, Sereth called from the ridge. Not because you permit us to stay. The officers retreated to their ship without responding, and within minutes, the patrol vessel was climbing back toward orbit. Tayson watched it go and felt the tension drain from his body, replaced by exhaustion so profound that his legs began to shake. Sereth appeared at his side. Having descended from the ridge with her Huntresses, you stood between us and armed soldiers, she said, and her voice carried something that sounded almost like wonder. You have no claws, no armor, no weapons. Yet, you put yourself in the path of danger for our sake. It seemed like the right thing to do. Tayson replied weakly. Foolish creature, Sereth said. But there was warmth in the words. His legs finally gave out, and she caught him before he hit the ground, lifting him easily despite her starved condition. You fight like you have claws, she said as she carried him toward shelter. Perhaps humans are more dangerous than they appear. Perhaps we are, Tayson agreed, and then exhaustion claimed him completely. The Vareth lived in a network of caves carved into the base of the dark mountains, tunnels that wound deep into the stone and opened into chambers where families huddled together for warmth. Tayson followed Sereth through the winding passages and felt his heart breaking with every step. They were everywhere. Gray-blue figures pressed against the walls and lying on thin bedding, their amber eyes tracking his movement with mixtures of fear and hope and exhaustion. Most of them were female. He counted quickly as they walked and realized that of the 43 survivors, only 11 were male. Our males gave their food to us during the worst years, Sereth explained quietly, seeing his confusion. They believed their duty was to ensure the females and children survived, even at the cost of their own lives. They starved themselves deliberately? They loved us, she said simply. That is what love means among our people. The males who remained were either very old or very young, grandfathers and children, who had been protected despite their protests, hunting and the fighting and the desperate struggle for survival had fallen entirely on the shoulders of the Huntresses. Dan set up his medical equipment in a large chamber near the center of the cave system, and word spread quickly that the human was offering to heal. Within an hour, he had a line of patients waiting, and he began the familiar work of examination and treatment that he had fled across the galaxy to escape. But this was different from the orbital hospitals. Here, every patient looked at him with gratitude instead of expectation. Here, every successful treatment was celebrated by the entire community. Here, his work mattered in a way it had not mattered for years. He treated infected wounds and set broken bones that had healed wrong and prescribed nutritional supplements from his limited supplies. A young huntress named Veth had a leg that had been mangled in a rock slide 3 years ago and never properly healed, leaving her unable to hunt with the other. Stazen spent 4 hours reconstructing the damaged tissue with his surgical tools, while Sareth held the young female still and whispered encouragements. When he finished, Veth stood on 2 strong legs for the first time in years and wept with joy. Her sisters gathered around her and joined her tears, and Tayson had to step outside the chamber to compose himself. He had forgotten what it felt like to save someone who truly appreciated being saved. Sareth found him leaning against the cave wall with his eyes closed. "You are tired," she observed. "I am always tired," he admitted. "That is why I came here seeking solitude, because I thought if I stopped working, I might finally rest." "But you cannot stop," she said. "I see it in you. The same drive that makes our huntresses pursue prey even when they are exhausted. The need to keep moving forward because stopping feels like dying. Your people need help that I am not equipped to provide," Tayson said. "I have medicine for a few dozen patients, not supplies to support 43 survivors indefinitely. We have survived 60 years without supplies." Sareth reminded him, "We can survive longer, but you should not have to survive," he said, and frustration crept into his voice. "You should be living, thriving, building families and futures instead of slowly starving in caves. That world was taken from us." Sareth said, "The compact decided our lives were worth less than the minerals beneath our feet. Then the compact needs to answer for what they did." Sareth made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The compact does not answer to anyone, certainly. Not to a forgotten species on a worthless world. They might answer to humans." Tayson said he had been thinking about this since Sareth first told him the truth about the relocation. Earth had joined the Galactic Compact 2 centuries ago, and in that time, humanity had developed a reputation for stubbornness and inconvenient questions when other species accepted injustice as the natural order of things. Humans made noise and demanded explanations and generally refused to let matters rest. It was one of the reasons other species found humans so annoying. "You would speak for us?" Sareth asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that cut through his exhaustion. "I would try," he said. "I have evidence now, your testimony and physical proof of what happened here. And humans take these things seriously. The compact will not want this story told. Then we will make them listen." Sareth studied him with her amber eyes, and he could see her weighing his words against 60 years of disappointment and betrayal. "Why do you care?" she asked finally. "You came here to be alone, to escape the burden of others. Yet now you offer to fight our battles." Tayson thought about the question carefully before answering. "I became a doctor because I wanted to help people," he said. "But somewhere along the way I lost sight of that purpose and started seeing patients as problems to be solved rather than lives to be saved." He looked toward the chamber where the Vareth waited for his return. "Your people reminded me why I chose this path in the first place," he continued, "and I cannot turn away from that simply because it is inconvenient." Sareth reached out and placed her hand on his arm. Her claws retracted and her touch surprisingly gentle. "You are a strange creature," she said, soft and slow and breakable. Yet you fight like you have claws of your own. Humans are stubborn." He replied, "It is perhaps our only real talent." A sound from outside the caves interrupted their conversation. The distant whine of engines descending through atmosphere. Tayan checked his communicator and felt his stomach drop. A ship was entering orbit. A compact patrol vessel responding to activity on a world that was supposed to be empty. "They are coming." He said. Sarath's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. "Then we will be ready," she answered. "We have hidden for 60 years. But we will not hide forever." "No," Tayson agreed. "This time we stand and face them together." He did not know if they could win. He did not know if the compact would listen to his arguments or simply arrest him and finish what they had started 6 decades ago, but he knew he was done running, whatever happened next. He would face it alongside the people he had accidentally found when he went looking for Solitude. 3 days passed after Tayson made his offer to talk. And during those 3 days, he continued leaving food outside his shelter each night. Each morning, the food was gone, and another small gift had been left in its place: a feather from some bird he had never seen, a fragment of crystal that caught the light in beautiful ways, a braided cord made from dried grass. Someone was accepting his offerings and responding in kind. But they were not yet ready to show themselves in daylight on the 4th morning. Everything changed. Tayson woke before dawn, as had become his habit. And when he opened his shelter door, he found her standing 10 meters away. She was tall, nearly 2 meters in height, with gray-blue skin that seemed to shift color slightly as the early light touched it. Her eyes were large and amber-colored, clearly designed for seeing in darkness. And they watched him with an intensity that made his breath catch in his chest. She was thin. That was the first thing his medical training noticed. The way her bones pressed against her skin, and her joints seemed too large for her limbs. This was not the thinness of a naturally slender species, but the devastating thinness of long starvation. Her hands hung at her sides, and he could see the retractable claws at her fingertips, sharp and curved and clearly designed for hunting. Her mouth was closed, but he caught a glimpse of teeth that confirmed what her claws suggested. This was a predator, a hunter built for killing prey, and she was starving to death. "Hello," Tayson said softly, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. She did not respond with words, only tilted her head slightly and continued watching. He reached slowly into his shelter and retrieved a container of food, then set it on the ground between them and stepped back. She moved forward with fluid grace, despite her weakened condition, and he noticed that she favored her left leg slightly, as if an old injury still caused pain. She picked up the food container and opened it, eating quickly but not desperately, maintaining awareness of him even as she satisfied her hunger. When the container was empty, she set it down and straightened to her full height. "You," she said, and her voice was rough, as if she had not spoken in a very long time, "are the new owner. I purchased rights to this world," Tayson admitted. "But I am beginning to think those rights were not legitimate. The compact sold our home," she said. And there was old anger in her words. "They came with ships and soldiers and told us we would be taken somewhere better. Somewhere with food and safety and future. The relocation," Tayson said, remembering the sparse references in his database. "They put us on transport ships," she continued. "Hundreds of my people crowded into metal boxes and promised a new world. But the ships never arrived at the destination they had named." "What happened?" "The ships stopped halfway and opened their doors over an empty moon," she said, and her amber eyes grew cold. "Most of my people walked out into vacuum because they believed the lies. But some of us saw the truth in time and fought our way to escape pods." Tayson felt sick. "They tried to kill you. They tried to make us disappear," she corrected, "because living Vareth on a planet the compact wanted to sell would be inconvenient for their records. So dead Vareth scattered across empty space was a cleaner solution." How many survived? 43, she said. 43 of us found our way back to our homeworld in damaged pods and broken shuttles, only to discover that everything had changed while we were gone. She gestured at the barren landscape around them. The compact stripped our world for minerals before abandoning their operation, and they destroyed the ecosystem in the process, killing the animals we hunted and poisoning the water we drank. How long ago was this? 60 cycles of our sun, she said. 60 years of slowly starving on a world that was once rich with life. Tayson did the math in his head and felt his heart deepen. These survivors had been struggling alone for 6 decades while the galaxy forgot they existed. I am sorry, he said, knowing the words were inadequate. You did not do this, she replied. You are only the latest owner of stolen property. What is your name? She studied him for a long moment before answering. I am Sareth of the Western Valley clan, senior huntress and voice of the Council of Mothers. I am Tayson, he said. I was a doctor on the human homeworld before I came here seeking solitude. A healer, she said, and something shifted in her expression. We have not had a healer in many years. How many of your people are injured? All of us, Sareth answered simply. Starvation damages the body in ways that do not heal. And we have suffered injuries from hunting and fighting and surviving that have never been properly treated. Tayson felt the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. The same weight he had fled across the galaxy, too. Escape, but this was different. These were not strangers in an endless line of broken bodies passing through his emergency ward. These were survivors of genocide who had been abandoned and forgotten by an uncaring galaxy. I have medical supplies, he said. Not much, but some basic equipment and medicines. Why would you help us? Sareth asked, and her tone suggested she had learned not to trust offers of assistance. Because I am a doctor, Tayson replied. And because what was done to your people was evil. And because I cannot simply pretend I do not see you suffering. Sareth watched him for another long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for deception. The other owners never saw us, she said finally. They came and surveyed and left. And we hid in caves and shadows and let them believe the world was empty. Why did you show yourselves to me? Because you left food, she said. And because you spoke words of greeting instead of words of claiming. And because our children are dying and we have nothing left to lose. She turned and gestured toward the mountains. Come, she said. Meet my people and see what your solitude has cost you. Tayson grabbed his medical kit from the shuttle and followed her across the barren plain toward the place where the Verith had been hiding for 60 years. He had come to this world to escape responsibility instead. He had found the greatest responsibility he had ever faced, but for the first time in years, he did not want to run from it. Tayson stood at the viewport of his cargo shuttle and watched the brown and gray world grow larger. Beneath him, this was Vareth 7, a planet that galactic surveys had classified as barren and worthless. A rock floating at the edge of explored space where nobody wanted to go and nothing valuable remained. He had purchased it for almost nothing. The licensing office on Station Kurath had barely looked at his application before stamping approval. And the clerk had even laughed when processing the payment. You want to live there alone? The clerk had asked with confusion in his voice. That is exactly what I want, Tayson had answered now as his shuttle descended through thin clouds. He felt something he had not experienced in years. Peace. For 23 years, he had worked as an emergency trauma surgeon in the orbital hospitals above Earth. And every single day had brought him broken bodies and grieving families and impossible choices about who would live and who would die. He had been good at his work. Perhaps too good, because they kept giving him the worst cases and expecting miracles. Eventually, the miracles stopped coming. and the failures started piling up in his memory like stones on his chest. He could not sleep without seeing their faces. He could not eat without remembering the ones he could not save. So he had sold everything he owned, bought passage to the frontier, and purchased the cheapest habitable world available. Earth 7 had atmosphere and water, and nothing else of interest to anyone. It was perfect. Shuttle touched down on a flat plain near a ridge of dark mountains, and Tayson spent his first hour simply standing outside and breathing air that no other human had ever breathed. The silence wrapped around him like a blanket. No emergency alarms, no desperate calls for help, no crying families in waiting rooms, just wind and stone and sky. He began unloading his supplies with methodical care, setting up the prefabricated shelter unit that would be his home and arranging the hydroponic systems that would grow his food. The work felt good in his hands. Simple and honest labor that produced visible results. By the end of his first week, he had established a functioning homestead near a cluster of dormant thermal vents that provided heat and energy. His small garden was already sprouting green shoots under artificial lights. He ate meals alone and slept deeply for the first time in years, and slowly began to feel like a person again, instead of a machine built for cutting and stitching on. The 8th day, he decided to explore the cave system beneath the thermal vents, hoping to find a more stable energy source deeper underground. Packed a small kit and descended into darkness with only a handheld light to guide his way. The caves were larger than he expected, winding passages that opened into vast chambers where his footsteps echoed like whispers. He found mineral deposits and underground streams and evidence of ancient volcanic activity. Then he found something else: claw marks on the stone walls. They were deep gouges in the rock, 5 parallel lines that could only have been made by something with very sharp and very strong fingers. Some of the marks were old and weathered, barely visible in the beam of his light, but others were fresh. The dust on the cave floor showed tracks as well, footprints that were almost human in shape, but longer and narrower with distinct indentations where claws had pressed into the ground. Tayson stood very still and felt his heart beating faster. The planetary survey had been clear about Vareth 7 being uninhabited. No intelligent life, no dangerous fauna, nothing but rocks and thin vegetation in sheltered valleys. Either the survey was wrong or someone was hiding something. Made his way back to the surface more quickly than he had descended, and spent the rest of the day checking and rechecking his shuttle sensors. The equipment was old and damaged from years of hard use, but the thermal imaging still functioned. As darkness fell over the plain, he activated the sensors and waited. The first heat signature appeared on the western ridge just after sunset, then another on the northern slope, then 3 more moving together through a narrow valley to the east. By midnight, he had counted at least 15 distinct signatures forming a loose circle around his homestead, and they were all watching. Tayson did not sleep that night. He sat in his shelter with the door sealed and reviewed every piece of information he could find about Vareth 7. In his shuttle database, the official records were sparse and carefully worded. The planet had been surveyed 60 years ago and found to contain significant mineral deposits beneath its surface. A mining operation had been proposed but never implemented. Native ecosystem had been classified as minimal, and the world had been designated for future development. That never came. Nothing about inhabitants, nothing about intelligent life, nothing about whatever was circling his camp in the darkness. When dawn finally broke over the mountains, Tayson opened his door and stepped outside. The heat signatures had retreated with the light, but he could see evidence of their presence now that he knew to look for it. Disturbed soil on the ridge, broken vegetation along the valley floor, and a single clear footprint pressed into the mud near his water collection system. Something had come very close while he sat inside. He knelt beside the footprint and studied it carefully. Shape suggested a bipedal creature, roughly his own height. But the depth of the impression indicated much less mass. Whatever had made this track was thin. Perhaps dangerously thin-starving. The word came to him unbidden and settled into his mind with uncomfortable weight. He was a doctor, trained to recognize the signs of malnutrition, even in species he had never encountered. This footprint told a story of desperation. Tajan stood and looked out at the silent landscape somewhere out there, hidden in caves and valleys and shadows. Something was watching him and waiting. He had come to this world seeking solitude and silence and escape from responsibility. Instead, he had found a mystery. Night, he left food outside his shelter door. A simple offering of nutrient paste and dried vegetables from his supplies. When morning came, the food was gone and a small stone had been placed in its spot. Dark and smooth and polished by careful hands. Picked up the stone and turned it over in his fingers. It was a gift. Someone was trying to communicate. Aiden and looked toward the mountains where his sensors had detected the largest cluster of heat signatures. He had spent 23 years trying to save people who were dying. He had fled to the edge of the galaxy to escape that burden, but now, standing on a world that was supposed to be empty, holding a gift from creatures that were clearly suffering, he felt something stirring in his chest that he thought he had buried forever. He could not simply ignore this. He was not built that way. "All right," he said quietly to the empty air, knowing that someone was probably listening. "I see you, and I am not going anywhere. So perhaps we should talk." The wind carried his words toward the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard a sound that might have been an answer.